Good morning, everyone. Shalom Aleichem. We're continuing Halachos Tzitzis. I got a message last night. Somebody sent me a car that was completely overturned on the highway. A good friend of mine, maybe a long-time listener, one of the longest time listeners. I think he's listening at least 15 years. And I don't have permission yet to say it over, but his son was driving from the Catskills. So I'm not going to say who it is, but his son's driving from the Catskills to New Jersey. And the car completely flipped. I'm saying completely flipped. Completely totaled. The boy crawled out of the car and walked away. He was taken to the hospital, just to make sure he was okay. He was fine. He went to a relative. He walked 2 hours after. He walked to a relative. And the boy does not remember what happened. He knows he got in the car, and the next thing he knew, he knows he was driving on the highway. The next thing he knew was he was upside down in the vehicle and he crawled out. He looks at himself, he sees he's wearing tzitzis, and he was toila, the miracle, on wearing tzitzis. Where did he get the idea to wear tzitzis from? Because his father listens to the Sunday morning shir. His father told him, we're learning Halachos Tzitzis, and we've said many times that even though there's no punishment if you don't wear tzitzis, you don't have to wear, but bi'idan rischa, at a time of anger, so then a person can be liable for it, and therefore tzitzis is a great protection. So from the Sunday morning shir, he told his son, he just messaged me last night, so I wasn't planning on learning Halachos Tzitzis this morning. I said, okay, at least we have to do some Halachos Tzitzis this morning. Okay, so we're in the middle of Siman Yud, and then I want to tell you something on the Parsha, which we usually do in the summer on Sundays. We're talking about how many corners a talis has to have in order to be chayiv in tzitzis, that it has to have at least 4 corners. Last time we learned, it was right before Shavuos, if the talis has more than 4 corners, you put it on the 4 furthest corners. What if the talis has 3 corners and you slit one of the corners, it becomes chayiv. So in other words, you diagonally cut into the 3rd corner. It has to be a very big and recognizable cut. Some say there needs to be at least 3 fingers breadth. And also you have to cut some of the beged. A slit alone would not render it a corner. But if you don't cut from the garment itself, you just make what we call a slit with a knife, then it's not chayiv until it's roiv pasuach. That's Siman Yud Sif Vav. We're up to Zayin. Talis shekafla. Let's say you have a 4-cornered garment that you doubled it over. Vitafra, and you sewed it. Migimel ruchaiseha, on 3 sides. So you hear the case? You have this massive beged, and then you folded it over, and I guess you sewed it on 3 sides. The 4th side you don't need to sew because the 4th side is the side that's already doubled over. So how do we view that garment? Even if the stitching is wide, and even if let's say the stitching doesn't go through both sides, it, so to speak, maybe only goes through one side of the garment, Ela meruach achas, you still now, do you make the tzitzis on the 4 corners of the original garment or the 4 corners after it's been doubled over? So halachos, you make the tzitzis on the 4 corners after it's doubled over. V'yei some say shafilu tafra meruach achas, even if it's sewed on one side, v'hashar psuchais, and the rest is open mahani. In other words, let's say you fold it over and you put stitching only over here. So it's folded on this side, it's stitched on this side, on the other 2 sides it's completely open. Still, you make the tzitzis on the new 4 corners. Okay? What if imloi tafra? What if you didn't sew it? In other words, you have this massive garment, and in order to wear it, you have to fold it over. Sometimes by nashim, they have big scarves. So in order to wear it, they have to fold it. Or even men sometimes, they have big scarves. So in order to wear it, they have to fold it over. So do you put Not that you put tzitzis on a scarf. I'm just giving by way of example. You have a garment. It's very, very big. And in order to wear it, you fold it over. Do you put the tzitzis on the new four corners or on the original four corners? V'im loy tafra, if you didn't sew it, nechelku apoiskim, it's machloikes. Im yatil tzitzis b'knafei apshuta, so you put the tzitzis on the regular corners, oyak kfulos, or the doubled over corners. V'lachin yizar shlayasa talis kfula. Therefore, you should be careful not to have a bent, folded over talis. Ela im kain tafra, unless you sew it. V'im I afshar. However, if all you have is a folded over talis, and there's no way to wear it unless you fold it over, then what do? Make the tzitzis on the regular four corners before it's folded over. Yaset tzitzis b'dalet kanfei sapshutim. You should make tzitzis on the four regular corners, v'yachal avarech, and you can make a bracha. What if the talis originally was so big that it was impossible to wear unless you fold it over? V'im betchila haisa aruka. What if in the beginning it was so long, kol kach, she'enu yachal l'lavshay, that it was not possible to wear, ela im kain koiflai, unless you fold it over, then yatil b'ay b'kanfei sapshutim, you put the tzitzis on the original four corners, but you cannot make a bracha. Avalo yivarich elam kain tafra. You can't make a bracha unless you sewed it. V'az yatil b'kanfei sakfulim. Then you make it when you sew it on the sewed up corners. V'yivarich, you can make a bracha. Yud, kafal achas min hakranos. Let's say you folded over one of the corners. Ay kol hakranos, va'asa be'igal, and you made a circle. You hear this case? You have a four-cornered garment, and you fold it over the corners, so now you have a sunshine beged. You know, because we love all kinds of people, and we want to express it in our talis. So they fold over the corners, and now you have a circular garment. It's not sewed. What did you do? You tied it. Afal pi shakashon, even though you tied it, oy tafran, and now you have 0 corners. The garment is not exempt from tzitzis. Like nifter mit tzitzis. V'yachal lahatel ata tzitzis bekefel. Basically, you put the tzitzis where it's doubled over, even though. Do you remember? The tzitzis has to be a certain distance from the edge. And now that you fold it over the corner, the tzitzis is too close to the edge. It's okay, because that folding over is not considered folding over. Why? Because you didn't sew it. All you did was, you tied it. Or tafran. So in other words, what you did was you tied it, or even, you sewed it, and now by putting the string on the garment, it's very close, it's less than the shear away from the edge. It's still okay, since if you spread it out, it will be above the kesher agaida. Im af lamata mi kesher agaida, you could put the tzitzis even below the kesher agaida. Im kisha yispashed, since when you spread it out, yelamala mi kesher agaida, it will be far enough away from the corner. Okay, why? Because even though we learned that when you sew, it's considered a new garment and you put it on the new 4 corners, that's when you sew and you create new corners. But if you don't create new corners, if it only had corners before, and now you don't have corners, you only have circular, so then it does not ruin the original 4 corners. Yud Aleph, we'll do one more here. V'im kafal hakranois, if you doubled over the corners, v'tafran biribua, and you sewed it in a way that it's square now. Yesh oimrim, some say shabazeh mahani hatfira, that the sewing will help. V'yatel tzitzis bekefel, and you put the tzitzis in the folded over corner, even though technically it's more than, we know that the hole cannot be more than 3 fingers away from the edge. And now that I fold it over, if I would unfold it, the hole would be more than 3 corners. But since I sewed it, and I made a corner, so I could follow its current state. So, you can put the tzitzis bekefel in the folded over part, af lamata mi kesher gaidol, even below the kesher gaidol, im kisha yispashet, I'm sorry. Afal pishu yoiser mi gimel atzbais, even though it's more than 3 corners of fingers away. Misvas hakaren, from the edge of the corner. In other words, like this. Take a look. You have this garment. You fold it over a corner. I make a new hole. If I would unfold it, it would be more than 3 fingers away from the edge. It's okay, because I sewed it and I produced a corner. V'rabim cholkim, many disagree. V'svirale, and they hold, Deloi mahani atfira, sewing doesn't help. We said earlier, sewing does help. There are those who hold sewing only helps if you fold the whole talus. You know when everyone agrees sewing helps? When you fold the talus in half. Then you sew it, that's a valid new sewing, and you created 4 new corners. But just to do it to 1 corner, there are those opinion that holds that even though you produced a new corner, sewing does not help. So, V'rabim cholkim, many disagree. V'svirale, they hold, Deloi mahani atfira, sewing does not help. Ela imkein kafal kalatalis, unless you folded the whole talis, kidal el din zayin. Okay, one more. Okay, this time for real. Yud beis. What if you had a circular garment? You're just a circular kind of guy. You like to wear circular tzitzis. Zalmi, anybody in Darche wear circular talis? No, right? They're very square over there. That's what I find. Yeah? But haya habeged agal, if the garment was circular, v'kafal misfasay olav, you folded an edge, v'tafray ad shenase meruba, and it became square. You had a circular talis, and you folded the corners to produce a square. So is that considered making a square garment? Okay? Im kafal hakranois. I'm sorry. Haya beged agal. If the beged was circular, the kafal misfasay olav, and you folded the edge, the tafra, and you sewed it at shenase meruba until it became square. Yato bot tzitzis. You could put tzitzis, but v'lo yivarech. You can't make a bracha. Even though we said in Zayin, we said, what did we say about a bracha? We said in Zayin Ches and Tes that if you folded the whole talus and you sewed it, you could make a bracha. But a circular garment that you folded and you sewed, you should put tzitzis on the new 4 corners, but you should not make a bracha. Vim hichnes svas habeged bifnim. If you, let's say you inserted the edge of the garment in the garment, v'tafrai, ad she'eino nikar klala kefal, that you can't see the folded over part at all. In other words, let's say you had a circular garment and then you tucked in the corners into the garment itself so that it's not recognizable at all that it was once circular and that you folded it over. Then we say, hakefal amal, you don't recognize the folded over part at all. Kederach shachayat emoisim, like the seamstresses, like the tailors do. Yachal levarich, you can make a bracha. Ve'efshar de tfira kazu mahani, it could be this sewing will help afla hakel, even to be lenient, namely that if you had a square garment and you folded it over and you made it circular and you inserted it and it doesn't have corners now, then you don't have to put tzitzis on it whatsoever. Okay, so that is Sivkatan Yud Gimel. Okay, I'm going to tell you something on the parsha.